Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast. The benefits of giving back often extend far beyond itself, especially in a world characterized by stress and self-absorption. So today we're picking the brain of Stephen G. Post, the founding director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care and Bioethics at Stony Brook University, to learn more about the ways in which volunteering can serve as a catalyst for personal growth and wellness, and perhaps even the cultivation of a more compassionate society. Hi, Stephen. It's lovely having you on the show.
How are you, Marie? It's nice to talk with you. You're in Melbourne, I know.
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. I'm aware
Good.
it's 10:30 p.m. on your end, so I really appreciate you coming on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to know, what are the biggest misconceptions you've heard or seen about volunteering?
Well, volunteering is something that needs to be well managed. People need to be able to exercise some choice, some autonomy. They need to be either doing something that they are comfortable doing and feel that it makes a difference, or sometimes they'll want to do something that they've never done before, but they need some choice in these things. And then one of the important features of actually having health benefits as a result is joining together and debriefing as a small group and focusing on the meaning of what one was doing. It's not just the volunteering that is important. That's an external activity, but it's also the kindness. I often speak of the kind volunteer benefiting for the most part to a greater extent than someone who's simply going through the motions because it's expected of them.
Right. It sounds like volunteering, apart from the act of giving back, does offer this place where you have people with common experiences and talk about it with them, and kind of they act like a sounding board almost with the experiences that you gain with volunteering.
Yes, absolutely. You want to create community around volunteering. If you just have a solitary individual doing some volunteering, it usually won't last. At least that's what most of the studies show. But if you
Yeah.
have some camaraderie and you've got a sense of a social purpose, that makes all the difference in the world. And you don't have to volunteer a lot to have benefits from it. And of course, the benefits are not directly sought, but they are an indirect side effect of volunteering. One of our studies, we asked people across America if they volunteered, and something along the lines of 41% said they had in the prior year. Then we asked, well, how long did you volunteer? About 100 hours over the course of the year, which you break it down, that could be a couple of hours a week. So it's not a high threshold. And then we ask questions like, did you feel happier? 95% of people felt happier. Did you feel more resilient? 90% of people felt more resilient. Did you feel more meaning and purpose in life? Same kinds of things. So there are a lot of benefits to getting away from the self and the problems of the self and focusing on how you can use your gifts, your talents to help others.
Yeah, those are some incredible statistics, and I'd love to get further into detail. But before I do that, I'd really like to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Stephen? And my first
Okay.
question that I'd like to ask you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, I'm a good dad. I look after my adult son, my adult daughter. We don't have any grandchildren at this point, but I do have my wife Mitsuko, who's from Kyoto, Japan, and we will go Japanese food shopping. We'll go to restaurants. We will enjoy her culture, and
Oh,
and I speak a little bit of Japanese, not much.
that is very sweet. So, what are some Japanese words that you do you have any favorite Japanese words?
Well, yeah, one of them would be "gambatte," which simply means "let's go."
Let's go.
Yeah,
Gambattane. Did I
um,
do that right?
yeah, you did that well. That was
Oh,
good. "Gambatte."
nice.
Uh, you can say something like "itadakimasu," meaning
Uitakimasu.
let's eat.
Let's
It's
eat,
not a
right?
very sophisticated grace, if you will, but that's what it is. It's let's eat. Okay,
Yeah,
itadakimasu.
it's definitely a phrase that you'd use on a daily basis, I'd say.
Yes. Yeah.
So what are some of the activities that you like to do with your kids? Well,
Well,
children, kids. I'm gonna
they're
read.
now
Yeah.
my daughter is in California. My son is in Rochester, New York. So I'm going to see him and his gal friend this weekend because he'll be around for Easter.
Are
But
you
my
looking for?
daughter out in California, in the Baja, which is south of California, actually in Mexico. I don't think she's making a special trip, but we'll talk over the phone. We'll Zoom, we'll text, and so forth.
Yeah, that's very nice. You have a long distance relationship with your children, it seems.
Well, in today's day and age, that's very often the case.
That is how it goes. I have the same kind of relationship with my parents, but
Mhm.
we'd be getting off topic there. But aside from spending time with your children and your wife, what are some other things that you like to do if you have some alone downtime?
Well, I write. I write. It's both professional, but it's also a way of relaxing and finding my inner being. So writing is always important, and I write a lot. I publish a lot of things because I always ask myself, why am I writing? I'm writing because I think it's for the benefit of some identifiable constituency. I write a lot about what I call deeply forgetful people, people with dementia, and my work has had a lot of impact around the world in that community. Again, because I'm always writing with caregivers in mind, with that population in mind. I'm not just writing to have another line item on my CV, which I really don't need. Oh,
And in your lifetime of writing, have there been any writers that you've looked up to as well?
well, I like the poet W.H. Auden a great deal. Robert Bly is another poet I think is fantastic. I think poetry matters. Robert Frost is just terrific. There are so many great poets and great essayists. So I like Chekhov's writing. He was a physician, a Russian physician who wrote many, many wonderful, brief, short stories. In some ways, he almost invented the short story. And his work is very powerful and gripping and always surprising. So I like the doctor writers a lot. They make a difference to me. And I
Yeah.
like the Russian writers. I like Dostoevsky. I like Tolstoy because no matter how badly someone behaves, there's always a kind of a resurrection story at the end where they sort of come back to humanity. And I like that. I think that's very optimistic.
Yeah, they sound like really strong figures as well. I personally have never gone into Russian poetry or literature, but it's definitely something that's been on my list to get to. Unfortunately, I am very slow at getting through a list of whatever I
Well,
have, but I hope to get there some point. Are there any recommendations that you would give?
yeah. Well, I actually helped publish a book by a great Russian sociologist and philosopher of love, and his name is Pitram, or Peter Sorokin, Sorkin. He wrote many books. He was at Harvard for a long time. He was one of the only people who was both in the prison of Tsar Peter, but also in the prison of the Bolsheviks. And then he came to America with his wife and his dog on a boat over the Baltic Sea. And he became a very distinguished figure in the history of the study of altruism, which is your topic today, and kindness. So his book, The Ways and Power of Love, it's a huge book, but it's probably the best thing that's ever been done, looking at how different cultures conceptualize kindness, but more than that, how they actually practice and have techniques that encourage kindness in themselves and in their communities. So The Ways and Power of Love is a great book, and it came out about 2000 with the John Templeton Press. It was actually written about 40 years ago, but hadn't been available. So now it's available and it's being read widely. And I wrote something like a 70-page foreword to it because the guy's life was so interesting.
That's amazing. We'll have to check that out then. And that's such a great suggestion. An amazing note to lead into our interview as well. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, how would you define personal development?
Well, I like to think in terms of identity formation. How do people develop an identity, a positive identity? And usually that involves growth over time. It involves the cultivation of virtues, empathic virtues, but also virtues of self-care, of equal regard. And role modeling is very important because typically we form these identities in a community. We form them even intergenerationally. So younger people learning from older people who are not really teaching deductively, not laying out ideas in some sort of blackboard type sense, but are simply transmitting by their body language, by their facial expression, by all the details of their life, by their tone of voice. And hopefully, with luck, everybody has some wonderful, uplifting role models who can help them achieve the kind of identity and form in the ways that we hope they will. In a medical school where I teach, we're always interested in how medical students are forming with regard to compassionate care, and we do an awful lot of work with that. We have ways of assessing it. We let patients give them feedback. We're always interested in their reflections on compassionate care and also on their assessment of their clinical role models. Is a role model someone they want to look up to and be like, or very occasionally, of course, it's rare, but it does happen. Maybe they run into a role model who teaches them exactly how they don't want to practice medicine. So this kind of development is not just an individual thing. It's really typically taking place in a community where certain expectations about virtues and behaviors are clarified, role modeled, and expected.
Yeah. And what is your definition of volunteering? Do you think it has to be through an organization, or would volunteering amongst individuals count?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. It does. It is true that volunteering typically has a social dimension. A group of people are volunteering in some way that's been organized by the Alzheimer's Association or some other such group, a local school. It might be time to clean up the park. But also individual volunteering is very important so that you can, with kindness, again, the issue is the internal dimension. It's not just the external action, but it's the cultivation of a kind approach to life, which is supported through volunteering. It doesn't mean that you get people exuding appreciation all the time, and you don't necessarily need that. You can just pay it forward and know that you're spreading the word, and the behavior that you're involved in is catching on, kind of like a dandelion. You never quite know where the bits of a dandelion are flowing in the winds, but you know they're out there.
Right. And in your opinion, what sort of personal traits or what trajectory of personal growth does volunteering tend to instill in volunteers?
Well, I think it does a lot of things. First of all, um, volunteering requires good self-control, mindfulness, because when you're volunteering, depending on what you're volunteering for, you're going to run into certain kinds of challenges. You may have people around you who are more difficult, who you define as, shall we say, not having had all the advantages in life. Um, um, and you want to be mindful. You want to monitor your emotions. You want to always be unconditionally positive with them. You want to employ a lot of positive psychology. You want to use forgiveness and kindness and gratitude, and really be teaching people, especially young people. I do that. I guess I can say I'm not a volunteer. I'm a paid professor, but I do a lot of volunteering around medical schools anyway. And I'm always aware, self-consciously, of how I'm affecting the lives of the young people around me. It's very important.
Yeah. And what are some benefits that you have witnessed or experienced personally from engaging in volunteer work, especially at the clinic?
Well, volunteering has been studied now very carefully from the perspective of mental and physical health, really over the last 30 years. It goes back to about the year 2000. I contributed very early on to with a book with Oxford called Altruism in Health. People who volunteer, again, just for a brief period, it's not so much how long you volunteer, but it's the kindness that you put into it. They self-report almost unanimously what gets called now the helper's high. They feel elated. They feel freed from the struggles they've had in life, from rumination, from hostility. There's very much evidence that it's de-stressing. Of course, you can overdo volunteering, and for people who are already involved in the helping professions like doctors and nurses, maybe they don't want to do a lot of volunteering because it's kind of built into their everyday lives. But most of the literature focuses on people who really, they've got everyday jobs, and it's when they take time away, they do volunteering, that they feel this renewed meaning in life. We did a study in Calgary, which is a town in Canada, where there are a lot of corporations, and there was a suicide rate among older men upon retirement from these companies. It was perhaps 4 to 5%, which was quite serious. And so we finally intervened, and what we did was we had them say, okay, you're going to retire in the next 5 years. Why don't you take an afternoon every week and just leave the premises? We won't dock your pay, and do the most creative, wonderful thing you can for others in your community. And so people did that. And as they did that, they realized that there's a world outside of their corporate universe. And there are things they can do that are very, very meaningful without that kind of structure. And so that suicide rate and depression rate went down to almost zero. And I like to tell corporate leaders that it's a great idea if you've got folks who've been around for a long time and you're worried about them because they're going to be leaving the company. Well, what you can do is just give them time, give them a day a week, and still pay them, but ask them to do the most creative thing that they individually choose to do, using their talents in the way they want to use them, and that works miracles for people.
Yeah, it's also just hitting two very sweet spots of both volunteering and also pursuing a creative p- passion that you enjoy, and
Mhm.
that itself would make it a lot more genuine, I feel like. And there's been also so much research, like you said, that has linked volunteering to altruism. But what is your opinion on volunteering without altruism? Would it still benefit the receipt the giver of volunteering?
Well, so definitions become important on this score.
Yeah.
Way back in about 1993, uh, in the United States, uh, public schools began to require service-based learning. And looking back on that, really these students, they're 13, 14 years old, they divide it into roughly three groups. There are people who just take to this like a duck takes to water. Maybe they've had good mentors, they've been volunteering in their families, who knows, but they just love doing this. They're warm, they're internally motivated, intrinsically motivated. They are happy as clams, and they wouldn't be doing anything else. Then there's another third of these young people who take a little time to come around. They do typically come around, but it takes some time for the light to come on. And that's okay. They have to acculturate to volunteering. That's why managing volunteers is important. There are schools now, business schools, that actually have courses on how to properly manage volunteers, because one of the things you don't want to do is have volunteers dropping aside, having unsuccessful experiences, which affect them adversely, perhaps for years. But there is still this final third, and they're kind of the recalcitrant ones. They're the people who just don't get into this. And maybe they will later on in life. Maybe they will have some kind of a midlife crisis and realize that they need to rethink their careers and so forth. But for sure, there is that group. So I don't think it's bad that they volunteer without that sort of intrinsic motivation, because it's still beneficial in certain respects. It's at least hopeful for them, and it does prime them, I think, to find more meaning in this kind of activity than they otherwise would.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to those who aren't naturally altruistic when it comes to finding something that they are passionate about to volunteer at?
Well, we have an office we have a lot of volunteers at this hospital, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And they come into an office and they sit down at a table, and somebody counsels them and shows them a book. It's a fairly thick book, mainly of photographs. Photographs of all the things in a big, big hospital that they might volunteer for. It could be working in the shop. It could be serving coffee. It could be working in family medicine. There are thousands of things that people can do. It could be parking cars and helping with the valets. But the main thing is that they do get a choice. And as I said earlier, sometimes they want to do something that they're familiar with, that they know they have skills for, because that gives them more of a sense that their time is being used in a worthwhile way. But there are just as many people who will say, I want to do something completely different than I've ever done before. So maybe I'll garden out in front of the hospital entrance. Maybe I will, help people with wheelchairs as they're getting into the radiology rooms for their MRIs. So people, they'll volunteer as transporters, we call that. So let people do all kinds of things, and hopefully that will work. Because if you just force them to do one thing and not something else, it can backfire.
That's really interesting. I never knew that these opportunities were available to people. How do people usually go about seeking them?
Well, most hospitals and most uh, health related organizations have lots of space on their websites. In the UK now, in England, on the National Health Service, they have something called social prescribing, which mainly takes place in the primary care offices across the country. It's a very successful program. So you have individuals who are called link workers, and they'll take somebody who um, is fairly lonely, fairly isolated, and expresses that, and they will connect them with an organization, sometimes through some of the online venues, but they'll connect them with an organization and help them get started. And that can be very, very helpful. The outcomes are good in terms of people's sense of well-being. And it doesn't have to be volunteering in the obvious way of helping others in need. It can be volunteering um, to help in the museum. It can be volunteering uh, to rake leaves in the park. As long as people are doing something that's pro-social and has them oftentimes together, forming community, it's beneficial typically.
That's really interesting. And if you have any personal anecdotes that you'd like to share, I'd be so curious to hear them. I'd love to hear more about the benefits of volunteering from the giver themselves, and maybe if you could go a bit more in depth as well to your own personal experience. I would find that so fascinating.
Well, absolutely. There are a million stories. I wrote a book called "Why Good Things Happen to Good People: How to Live a Longer, Healthier, Happier Life Through the Simple Act of Giving," and it's just loaded with anecdotes of people who got so much out of volunteering. And you think about this, maybe you'll say, well, if people are having a hard time in life, if they're struggling, does this work for them? Actually, that's when it's even more important. It's more important for people who are trying to find meaning and purpose in life when, frankly, they're struggling, if you will, with affluenza, a word we use sometimes, when life doesn't seem to be going too well, and they're looking for something new. Volunteering is a great way to reinvent yourself, and there are many, many cases along those lines. I've spent over the last 30 or 40 years, I've always provided respite care for a few hours a week for a caregiver for someone with Alzheimer's, just enough time for them to get out to shop, to go get a cup of tea with an old friend, or maybe to go see a movie. And that benefited me tremendously because through that experience, I began to develop a community with these caregivers and with people who are affected by deep forgetfulness. And my book, Why Good Things, well, the other book, Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People, out with Hopkins, is probably the most popular book in the field of dementia care today. And it's all because I didn't keep myself away from the actual constituency. You want to, when you're doing any kind of research, any kind of work, it's much better if you feel the call of individuals who are truly needful, and you're not just doing it for reasons of ego and prestige. And I've known many, many people who have found their whole careers, wonderful careers, through volunteering, especially at younger ages, and they want to develop that. It gives them something to live for. It gives them a desire to have excellence and to achieve, not for themselves so much, but for the purpose of others. And of course, in the process, they become excellent as well.
And when you were volunteering, did you face any big challenges that you felt like you had to really overcome? And how did you go through that?
Well, I had to learn a lot. If you volunteer well, you have to be willing to educate yourself. You have to be willing to read and to listen to people who have experience. You might have to even attend a class or two. So I began to learn all about dementia as a volunteer many years ago, really in the mid 1990s. And it's hard not to be curious. You know, how little we know, how eager to learn. We learn more, and studies show this, when we're not just learning for ourselves, but learning with some sort of higher purpose for others. Kids in high schools and grade schools do better academically when they have some purpose for which they are studying that goes beyond themselves. And I think that's something that's very, very important. Most of our best medical students are the best, not necessarily because they have the highest scores on their tests, or maybe because they have the highest IQs or some such thing, but really because they've been deeply motivated by some experience. They feel like especially if they're wounded healers, maybe they've been ill, maybe they had childhood cancer, and they have a wonderful doctor who took care of them. And so they started volunteering in the children's hospital, and now they're medical students, and they want to go on and they want to pass the torch on to others. And so it's this whole sense of finding meaning and purpose in helping others with kindness, with dignity, with humility, that really matters, I think.
Yeah, and it sounds like similar to a lot of other pursuits that require stepping out of your comfort zone. One of the most difficult parts is actually going out there and starting the venture. So, what advice do you have for people who might be hesitant to volunteer?
Well, just go do it. You know, sometimes people think, well, there's nothing in it for me, and therefore, why should I do it? You know, we did a little study, my colleagues, of older adults who, after long and successful marriages, lost their spouses. And they went through, as would be predictable, a fairly significant period of grief and bereavement. And the ones who were helping either as volunteers or informally, not through organized volunteering, but just individually in their neighborhoods, or maybe through their faith communities, maybe through the schools, whatever, they were getting through this process quicker and in a more lasting way, which doesn't surprise me at all. So we did a conference in New York City. This is about 10 years ago, with the New York Society of Widows and Widowers. There is such a thing. And I gave a talk, and it was a big, full conference center. And at the end, there was a guy in the back of the room. And I was saying to them throughout, I said, you know, look, you can't depend on reciprocity. That's not the point. There are still benefits for you in terms of resilience, in terms of happiness, meaning, purpose, and so forth, which don't require reciprocity. They're just kind of baked into the action of kind giving. But this guy in the back of the room afterwards, he was frantically waving his hands. And he said, I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing. Do they say that in Melbourne? I don't know.
I've never heard someone say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it exists in New York to some degree. And I said, well, you're not doing nothing for nothing, because what you're doing is you're better able to manage your grief and your bereavement, having lost your loved one. And then he could begin to see that there could be internal benefits that are not based on reciprocal demands or calculations or transactions. I think a lot of people in our culture are transactional in their thinking. And of course, sometimes you have to be transactional if you're running a business or whatever, but it's not the whole story of life. And we evolved. This is another thing too, is that people think altruism is contrary to human nature. Actually, not in the least. Darwin himself, as he got older, wrote a lot about what's called group altruism. It's not me versus you because we're competing for some mutually desired object in the environment. It's the fact that we're evolving within a group of some kind, and that group will do better over the long haul to the extent that the people within it are kind, generous, helpful, altruistic, taking care of each other. That group will do better vis-a-vis the other group, right? So
Yeah.
we did a little study of car dealerships, believe it or not, to bring this kind of home. And there was a Honda dealership when the epidemic hit, and they were getting very little business, so they fired a whole lot of people. And then there was another dealership across the street, a different dealership, and they did furloughs. So everybody together as a community decided that they would take a day off unpaid a week so they could all keep their jobs. And the company that did the furloughs did much better. They were able to stay in business, and the one that fired folks went out of business. So that's just an example of how you can do better if you mobilize this altruistic kindness than if you don't.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And now to kind of bring it more on the practical side of altruism and volunteering, I'd be really keen to hear about your habits that you practice when you are volunteering yourself. So now we're moving on to the practices and habits section. And the first thing I'd like to ask you is, what is a habit that you do when you're volunteering to stay in the mindset of mindfulness?
Well, one thing that's important to me is to volunteer with a friend. I think that can be very beneficial. A good friend is somebody who gives you feedback, who makes sure that you're staying on course, that you're behaving in ways that are consistent with your highest aspirations. A good friend isn't necessarily someone you just party with or hang out with. Aristotle said that a friend is someone you can trust to keep you on course. So it's good to have a friend. I think volunteering with one's family is a great idea, especially for the kids, because the kids otherwise, what are they doing? They're sitting behind their screens, so-called screenagers, and they're not necessarily happy. So you want, as much as possible, to engage your family, your young people. And I find that oftentimes parents are very anxious to find an opportunity for their kids because their kids are struggling and they need to learn the benefits of giving. So we need to think about this as a way of helping young people and helping our families come together. When there's a disagreement among volunteers, you don't get angry. What you do is you sit down and you have some core values, which I think are important to state and even write down: kindness, forgiveness, gratitude, diligence, and so forth. And then you can sit and talk about what went wrong or what went right in light of those values. And that's a lot better than losing it and screaming or whatever. You don't want any of that in this context.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And it sounds like it not only provides this social connectedness and provides someone you can debrief with, but it also sounds like a great bonding experience for the group in a larger sense. Are there any struggles when it comes to doing this? Is there some hesitancy when asking friends or family to come along with you to volunteering? How would you address that?
Well, there can be, but you get used to it and you get pretty good at inviting people to come along. Loneliness is being studied now in a lot of the public health journals. We know that during COVID, there was an awful lot of isolation, and it definitely did some damage psychologically and even physically to people. So they really want to get out and reaffirm their social kindness and their capacity to help others. You got to remember that both Shakespeare and Picasso said together, and I quote, in different centuries, the purpose of life is to follow your callings and use them to contribute to the lives of others. And that's really the purpose of life. I mean, if you're a Hindu, it comes down to freedom, love, and creativity. There's no way that you can engage in freedom, love, and creativity better than to be contributing to the lives of others. And that's what we need to get excited about and realize how valuable that is, of course, to others, but to us. And forming community is so important. People are now, at least around the U.S., in the big cities, they're struggling with community. And the depression rates are sky high, which is very unfortunate. Maybe it's the divisiveness in our environment. Maybe it's the acrimony. Sometimes I'll take a look at the psychiatric emergency room on a Saturday night, and it's really something to see. It's very difficult. So many people have lost the center of gravity of their inner peace these days because somehow the culture feels like it's falling apart and the world doesn't seem like it's as safe as it used to be or secure. And so, I think there are three things that you can do that are really important. One is, I think meditation is important. Taking that time alone, breathe deep, meditate, relax, so that you're not just being pushed around by the external forces in the society. That's important. Also, cherish nature. Nature is so peaceful. When you go to the local meditation center, you'll always hear the wind chimes and the little stream of water going over the rocks and so forth. There's something about cherishing nature that frees people from all of this anxiety that has crept into our modern world and left us feeling empty inside. And then I think that the key thing too is to just help others, and volunteering is a wonderful way to do that. It's also important to get together in light of your volunteering and have a dinner, a cup of coffee, go out and get a bagel, whatever it might be, but talk with people about what they're getting out of it so that they can feel heard and understood and appreciated for what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It has been such a pleasure talking to you. Now we're moving on to the open mic section, and this is your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic, but if it is, it's your call. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Well, all over the world now, I think people are seeking inner peace. Of course, they're hopefully seeking outer peace as well. But everything that we know right now points to a higher incidence of anxiety and depression. And we need to see volunteering as one part of the solution. It's how people can recreate a community. It's how they can cultivate positive emotions. There's a field now called positive psychology, which is not disease-based. It's not about depression and all these kinds of things, but it's about the greatest assets that we have, attentive listening, compassion, forgiveness, those kinds of things that make a good life. So we need to combine positive psychology with volunteering, and then I think we can make a difference. And it is making a difference. This is why it's so interesting to see social prescribing becoming part of the healthcare systems in the UK and in Canada, and even somewhat in a fledgling fashion in the US. There's now a United States Association for Social Prescribing, and a lot of doctors are getting very interested in it because they think that their patients really need it. I was out at the University of Cincinnati Children's Hospital, which is one of our better ones, some few years ago, and they had a program for adolescents with various addictions. And, if you look at the social profile of these adolescents, none of them had any connection with community. They were simply isolated individuals, and that is really sad. So what the hospital did was it began to organize these individuals in ways that would take advantage of their volunteering and get them engaged in social projects. And it helped a great deal. It does help a great deal as people try to overcome their addictions. That's what AA is about, Alcoholics Anonymous. The 12th step of the 12 steps is to help other people who have had your problem, sometimes called the wounded healer. So you want to use that experience that you've had in a meaningful way and find that your life is valuable because you may not be professionally trained, but you've learned a lot from your experience.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like it was really informative, and I love the way you put it as well. I loved hearing your perspectives on it, and I know it's really late where you are, so I really appreciate you coming on with us today, Stephen. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Well, they can go to my website and see a whole lot of articles and videos and so forth. That's it's Stephen with a PH, gpost.com. They can also go to my institute, which I founded with the philanthropist Sir John Templeton, unlimitedloveinstitute.org.
Excellent.
Or potentially they could come to Stony Brook University. Just go stonybrook.edu/bioethics.
Excellent. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in.
And get a copy of Why Good Things Happen to Good People, because that is the classic book.
Excellent. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episodes.
Okay.
You've been listening to the Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pe.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.